The last time a man's heart stopped in front of me, a doctor was standing 3 feet away, screaming that I had killed him. He was wrong. I want you to understand that from the very first breath of this story, because for about 6 hours that night, I was the only person in the building who knew he was wrong. And knowing something alone, in the dark, while everyone louder than you insists on the opposite, that is its own kind of drowning. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. Everyone on the floor calls me Nell. I was 57 years old that winter, and I had spent the better part of a decade working the night shift in the cardiac intensive care unit at Marin Hollow Regional. Nights, by choice. People always assumed it was because I couldn't get a day slot, or because I was winding down toward retirement, keeping my head low, running out the clock. They assumed a lot of things about me. That was, in a way, the whole problem. And, in the end, the whole answer. If you have never been inside an ICU at 3 in the morning, let me tell you what it is. It is quiet, the way a held breath is quiet. Machines speak in soft, patient tones. Monitors glow green and blue over each bed, like little constellations. And if you have done this long enough, you stop reading them as numbers and start hearing them as a language. A rhythm changes by a fraction, and something in the back of your neck goes cold before your brain has even caught up. That is what happened with Mr. Vance. Harold Vance was in bed 9, 71. A big man who had been a bigger man once, with a jaw that still remembered how to give orders, even while he slept. He'd come in 3 days earlier after an episode with his heart, and he was, by the charts, stable and improving. But that night, somewhere around 10, I was standing at the foot of his bed with a cup of tea going cold in my hand, and I felt that cold at the back of my neck. His rhythm on the monitor had a hitch in it. Nothing a machine would alarm for. Just a hesitation, like a man clearing his throat before he says something he isn't sure he should. I pulled up his trends. I compared them against the 2 nights before, and I saw the shape of a problem beginning. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that arrives politely, and then, all at once, doesn't. I charted it, every detail. I flagged it for the overnight resident, a good, tired young man named Dr. Okafor, and together we agreed to hold a certain medication that the day team had ordered increased. A medication that, given what I was watching in that rhythm, could tip him over an edge he was already leaning toward. That should have been the end of it. A nurse notices something, a doctor agrees, the patient is protected. That is how it is supposed to work. Then the sun came up, and Dr. Grant Prescott arrived, and the world went back to pretending it knew better than the night. You have met a Grant Prescott. Maybe not a doctor, maybe a manager, a professor, a man at a dinner party, but you have met him. He was handsome in the way that expensive haircuts and good sleep make a man handsome. He walked into a room like the room had been waiting for him. When he spoke to patients, they adored him. When he spoke to nurses, he spoke through us, the way you'd speak past a coat rack to reach the door. He came onto the floor at 7 with his coffee and his entourage of residents, and he stopped at bed 9, and he looked at Harold Vance's chart. And then he looked at my note, holding the medication, and he laughed. He actually laughed. "Who wrote this?" he said. "Not to me, to the residents." "I did," I said. "Overnight, his rhythm is fine." He didn't look up. "You held a standing order because of a wiggle on a strip? At night, everything looks scary. That's why we don't let the night shift make decisions." He said it lightly, like a joke. The way cruel people do, so that if you flinch, they can call you sensitive. Restart the full dose. Now. I could have argued. I opened my mouth to argue. And here is a thing I have learned in 57 years. Some rooms are not built to hear you. You can be completely right and still be shouting into a wall that has already decided you are wrong. Dr. S. Okafor, standing behind him, gave me a small, apologetic shake of the head. Not now. Not worth it. So I said, "I'd like the order in writing, please." Prescott finally looked at me. "Excuse me?" "The change to the standing order. I'd like it entered under your name, in the chart, in writing. That's all." Something flickered across his face, the smallest recognition that I had just, very quietly, made him accountable. He didn't like it, but he entered the order. And I want you to remember that he entered it, because 6 hours later, that entry would be the only honest thing in the room. The Vances arrived at 9. There were 2 of them that mattered. Harold's son, Preston, a soft, worried man who mostly stood in corners looking at his phone, and Harold's daughter, Camille. Camille Vance was maybe 40, and she wore money the way some people wear perfume. You knew she was in the building before you saw her. She came to the nurse's station, and she did not ask. She announced. She wanted the senior physician. She wanted to know why her father wasn't in a private wing. She wanted a list of every person who had touched him. And then she looked at me, in my plain scrubs, with my gray hair, and my sensible shoes, and my face that had been awake for 11 hours. And she decided, in the way that people like Camille decide things, that I was furniture that had gotten above itself. "Were you the night nurse?" she said. I was. "My father said a woman was fussing over him all night, waking him up, poking at machines." She wrinkled her nose. "He needs rest. He doesn't need someone hovering because she's bored. Honestly, he found you cold, unpleasant. He's a very important man, and I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." I have been called worse, but there is a particular sting to being told you were cold to a man whose heart you sat beside at 3 a.m., watching a hitch in his rhythm, willing him to keep going. I had not been bored. I had been afraid for him. And now his daughter was standing in the light of a comfortable morning, telling me I had been a nuisance for it. "I understand exactly who I'm dealing with," I said, quietly, because it was true in more ways than she could have known. She took it as insolence. Of course she did. By noon, it had become a campaign. Camille found Prescott, and Prescott found an audience, and the 2 of them together were a fire that fed itself. She wanted me removed from her father's care. He, delighted to have a wealthy family adoring him, agreed that, yes, the night nurse had overstepped, had practiced medicine without a license, had frightened the family. He said it at the nurse's station. Loudly, in front of Rosa and 2 younger nurses and a unit clerk and a janitor emptying a bin. "You do not," he said, pointing his finger 4 inches from my face, "override a physician. You are a nurse. You chart, you medicate, you follow orders. That is the job. You are not paid to think you know better than the people who went to medical school." His voice climbed. "I don't know what you imagine you are, but let me be very clear, in front of everyone. You are the night nurse. That is all you are. And you owe this family an apology." The floor went silent. You could hear a monitor beeping in a distant room. I want to tell you that I stood tall and delivered a devastating speech and walked out to applause. That is not what happened. What happened is that I felt my face go hot and my hands go cold. And 30 years of a life I had walked away from rose up in my throat, and I swallowed it back down. Because the loudest thing in that hallway was not Grant Prescott. It was the small, cold voice in my own chest that had been right. About bed 9 at 10 o'clock the night before, and was, I already suspected, right again now. So I did the hardest thing. I looked at Camille Vance, and I said, "I'm sorry you were upset. That was never my intention." An apology for her feelings, not for my judgment. There is a difference, and I made sure, quietly, that the difference was real. I did not say I was wrong, because I wasn't. Rosa caught my arm as I walked away. "Nell," she whispered, "just give the dose. Restart it like he wants. Cover yourself, please. It's not worth your job. If I give that dose the way he wants..." I said, "we're going to be running a code on Mr. Vance before morning." She looked at me for a long moment. "Then chart it," she said finally. "Chart everything. Because if you're right, they'll try to say it was you." She was smarter than both of us knew. I want to tell you about the rest of that day shift, before I came back for the night. Because it matters. It shows you the difference between the 2 worlds, the loud one and the quiet one. And it shows you that what happened to Mr. Vance wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern. There was a girl on days that season, a new nurse named Kayla, 23 years old and brilliant and terrified. And late that afternoon, before I left, I watched her catch something on a patient in bed 4. A small change in a blood pressure trend that most people would have missed. Exactly the kind of thing you catch when you're new enough to still be scared of everything. She flagged it. She was right. And a resident, one of Prescott's little followers, waved her off the way Prescott had waved me off. Told her she was overthinking it. Told her to stop creating work. I found Kayla in the medication room afterward, blinking hard at the wall. And I recognized the exact posture. The cold tile against your back, the swallowed thing in your throat. You saw it. I told her quietly. You were right. Don't let them teach you not to see. But he said, I know what he said. I put a hand on her shoulder. There are two kinds of people in a hospital, Kayla. The ones who need to be the smartest person in the room, and the ones who need the patient to live. They don't always want the same things. And when they don't, you plant your feet. You chart it, and you plant your feet, and you let them be angry. She looked at me like I'd handed her something she'd been waiting her whole short career to be given permission to hold. Is that what you do? Every single night, I said. I went and looked at bed 4 myself on my way out. Kayla was right. I adjusted the plan, quietly, and I noted it, and by the next morning, that patient was fine. Because a scared 23-year-old had seen the truth, and a tired old night nurse had backed her up. Nobody wrote a report about it. Nobody ever does, about the disasters that don't happen. The quiet good gets no headlines. It just goes home at dawn and comes back at dusk. I thought about Kayla a lot that night, sitting by Mr. Vance. I thought, they are training a whole generation to stop seeing, because seeing is inconvenient to the people who'd rather be certain than correct. And I made a decision, somewhere in the small hours, that I was too tired to fully understand yet. I decided I was done being quiet about it. I just didn't know yet what the world was about to do to hand me the microphone. Here is what I did that night, and I did it with my hands, shaking, because being right is not the same as being safe. I came back from my shift at 7. I read the chart. Prescott's order was there in writing, exactly as I'd asked. Restart the full dose, his name on it, time-stamped. Good. I took Mr. Vance's baseline. His rhythm still had that hitch. Worse now. The shape I had learned to fear across a career I had not told anyone in that building about. I did not give the full dose. I gave what the protocol, the actual written, hospital-approved cardiac protocol, said to give a patient with exactly these signs. Which was less, which was careful. And I documented in plain language precisely why. Patient's telemetry consistent with early conduction instability. Full dose per doctor Prescott's order held, pending reassessment. Per protocol section 4. Criteria met. Charted at 7:52 p.m. Charted again at 9. Charted at 11. I paged the overnight physician, a different resident that night, and I told her, on the record, exactly what I was watching and exactly what I expected to happen if we weren't ready. She was young. She half listened. People half listened to the night nurse, but it was on the record. And then I waited, in that held breath quiet, next to bed 9, with my cold tea and my cold hands. And I watched a man sleep who did not know that 2 people who loved him and one who was supposed to heal him had spent the day trying to take away the one person watching the hitch in his heart. He woke once, a little after 1 in the morning. That happens with heart patients. The body surfaces for a moment in the deep of the night, restless. And you can either treat it as a task or treat it as a person. Harold Vance opened his eyes, and he was confused and a little frightened. This way they all are at that hour. And he looked at me, this big man, reduced to a hospital gown and a tangle of wires. And he said, "Are you the one who keeps waking me up?" "I am," I said. "I'm sorry. I'm keeping an eye on your heart. It's been telling me little stories all night, and I don't quite like them." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My daughter says you're cold." Not accusing, just tired and honest, the way people are at 1 a.m. "I know she does," I said. "She's frightened for you." People say all kinds of things when they're frightened for someone they love. I don't hold it against her. He looked at me for a long moment, in the dim light, and something in his face changed. Some old executive instinct for reading people, cutting through the fog. "You're not cold," he said slowly. "You're the only one in here who's actually watching me. Everyone else looks at the machines." "You look at me." He seemed almost surprised by his own words. "Why is that?" I straightened his blanket. "Because the machines only tell you what already happened," I said. "The person tells you what's about to." He fell back asleep a few minutes. Later, calmer. And I sat there in the dark with my hand near his. And I want you to understand, that is the moment I would have fought the whole hospital for. Not an abstraction, not a principle. A frightened man at 1 a.m. who'd figured out, in his last lucid stretch before everything went wrong, that the woman his daughter called cold was the only one in the building truly seeing him. I would carry that man through the fire that was coming. I'd already decided. I just didn't know yet how close the fire was. At 3:04 a.m., it stopped being a hitch. The monitor did not politely warn me. It screamed. The green line over bed 9 broke into the ugly, chaotic scrawl that every ICU nurse sees in their nightmares. And every alarm on the wall lit up at once, and Harold Vance's chest stopped doing the one thing chests are for. I hit the code button before I had finished standing up. And then the strangest thing happened, the thing that I still think about. The world got very slow and very clear, the way it used to for me, in a life I'd left. And my hands knew exactly what to do before my fear could catch up. "Coding, bed 9, I called, and my voice did not shake at all. "Start compressions. Rosa, crash cart. Somebody page the overnight and get Prescott. He's on call." The room filled. Compressions started, and I ran it. I ran that code the way you run down a hallway you've run 1,000 times in the dark. I called the rhythm. I called the interventions. I called the timing, and I named each one out loud so the young hands around me knew what to do and when. Not the guessing kind of running a code, the kind where every step is a step you have taken before, and you already know what comes next. And I knew what came next, because, and this is the thing none of them knew yet, I had written what came next. Prescott arrived 4 minutes in, coat over his scrubs, hair a mess, and he was not the man from the hallway. In a real emergency, the loud ones often aren't. He looked at the chaos, and he reached for the wrong thing. An intervention that the family's beloved, confident medical school doctor genuinely believed was right. And that would have, in that specific rhythm, made everything worse. "No," I said. He stared at me. "Not that. His rhythm is conduction, not what you think. Protocol Section 4. We do this." And I told him precisely the next 3 steps in order the way they were written. For one long second, everything hung there. A dying man on a bed. A doctor who outranked me on paper. A room full of people who had watched him humiliate me 12 hours before. And me, the night nurse, telling him he was wrong, with a man's heart in the balance. And Prescott, I will give him this one thing. Prescott looked at the monitor and looked at me, and something in his face understood that I was not guessing. "Do it," he said. "Do what she says." We did it. My way. The protocol's way. At 3:19 a.m., Harold Vance's heart came back. The green line steadied. The ugly scrawl smoothed into a rhythm, imperfect, tired, but his. Somebody exhaled so loud, it was almost a sob. Rosa was staring at me across the bed with her hand over her mouth. And Harold Vance, who could not have known that any of it had happened, took a long, rattling, gorgeous breath on his own. I stepped back from the bed. My legs finally started shaking, now that they were allowed to. And I looked up, and Grant Prescott was looking at me like he had never seen me before in his life. "Where," he said slowly, "did you learn to run a code like that?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Morning came the way mornings come after a night like that. Gray and enormous and unreal. The day team arrived to find the story already spreading. The overnight resident had charted it. Rosa had charted it. And there, in the record, was the whole clean spine of the night. My note at 7:52, and 9, and 11. The page to the overnight physician. The withheld full dose, with the protocol section cited. And Prescott's order from the day before, in writing, in his name, restart full. The order I had, thank God, refused to follow. The hospital does what hospitals do after a near miss. There is a review. People pull the logs. And the logs, unlike people, do not care who is loud and who is quiet and who has money and who has gray hair. The log said, in cold green data, that at every single point across 2 shifts, the night nurse had been right and the confident doctor had been wrong. And the only reason the man in bed 9 was alive was that she had refused to stop thinking. But that was not the part that undid the room. The part that undid the room came at 9 that morning, when the protocol itself was pulled up on the big screen in the conference room. The cardiac emergency protocol, the hospital's own official document, the one I had cited 3 times in the chart, the one I had run the code by, Marin Hollow's protocol. And Prescott, who had spent a whole day telling me I was just a nurse who could not possibly know better than a doctor, was staring at the header of that document. At the bottom of the last page, under authored by was a name: Eleanor Whitmore, MD. I had not always been the night nurse. 30 years ago, I was a cardiologist, an attending, right there at Marin Hollow, back when it was half the size. I wrote that protocol. I trained residents who are now running their own departments in 3 states. I was, if you want the plain truth of it, very good. And I loved it. And I never once told the people I worked beside on the night shift, because it was mine to keep, and it was none of their business. And more than that, because I had learned that the title got in the way of the work. I left medicine at 45. My husband Daniel got sick, the fast, cruel kind of sick, and I sat beside his hospital bed for 11 months. And I watched, from the wrong side of the rail, for the first time, how it felt to be a frightened person in a bed with your whole life balanced on whether the one nurse in the room at 3 a.m. actually saw you. Some of them did, some of them didn't. The ones who did, I will never in my life forget their faces. There was one in particular, a night nurse named Gloria, heavy-set and slow-moving and utterly unhurried, who came into Daniel's room at 3 in the morning during his worst week. The week the doctors had run out of confident sentences, and who did not fuss with the machines or recite numbers at me. She sat down. She took Daniel's hand, and then she took mine, and she said, "He's frightened, and so are you. And both of those things are allowed in here." And she stayed. She stayed past the end of her rounds, past when any protocol required her, to just sitting with 2 terrified people in the dark, because she had decided that being present was part of the medicine. Nobody would ever put that on a chart. There's no billing code for it. But I have thought about Gloria almost every single night of the 12 years since. And I became who I became partly because of her. She showed me that the most important work in a hospital is often the work that no title can see and no meeting can measure. She was, by the ranking of that building, nobody. She was the most important person in my husband's death, and mine. When Daniel died, I could not go back to being the doctor who swept in for 11 minutes and swept out. I did not want the 11 minutes. I wanted the 3 a.m. I wanted to be the one in the room. So I did a thing that made no sense to anybody who knew me. I retrained, and I came back as a nurse, on nights, and I told no one what I had been. I did not want to be Dr. Whitmore, revered and distant. I wanted to be Nell, who sees you. For 12 years, that is exactly who I was. And it was the truest work I have ever done. And then a man pointed his finger in my face and told me I was just that. He had no idea. None of them did. Not Prescott, not Camille, not Harold Vance sleeping in bed 9 while people fought over his life. I had chosen to be small. There's a difference between a person who is small and a person who has chosen out of love to stop needing to be seen. Camille Vance never learned that difference. It cost her almost everything. There is one more piece, and it is the piece that turned the whole night on its axis. The reason the board happened to be in the building that morning, the real reason there were suits and clipboards in the conference room at 9 a.m., was that Marin Hollow had spent a year quietly designing a new senior position, Director of Patient Safety. Someone to sit above the daily churn and make sure the machines and the humans and the loud people and the quiet people all added up to patients not dying of preventable things at 3 a.m. They had a candidate in mind. They had had a candidate in mind for months. They had simply been waiting, they told me later, for the right moment to ask her, because she was famously difficult to persuade, because she had turned down every promotion for a decade, because she liked the night shift and did not want a title. You already know who the candidate was, the chief of medicine, a woman named Dr. Aruna Basi, who had been a second-year resident under me 30 years before, and had never, not once in 12 years of passing me in the halls, let on that she knew exactly who the night nurse was, stood up in that conference room, in front of the logs and the protocol, and my name on the bottom of it, and in front of Grant Prescott, and said, "I think we can stop pretending now. Nell, the position was always going to be yours. We were just waiting for you to be ready to say yes. After last night, I don't think anyone in this hospital is going to argue." Nobody argued. Let me tell you about the 2 apologies I got that morning, because they were nothing alike. Grant Prescott's was the smaller one. He found me by the elevators, and he had the grace, at least, to look like a man who had not slept. "I didn't know," he started. "No," I said, "you didn't. But that's not actually the problem, Grant." I called him Grant, not Doctor, and I saw him notice it. "The problem is that you spoke to me the way you did when you thought I was nobody. If I really had been just a tired knot nurse who'd been doing this for 12 years and knew that man's rhythm better than anyone in the building, I still would have been right. And you still would have been wrong to speak to me like that. The title isn't what makes a person worth listening to. Please, for the next nurse, remember that." He didn't have anything to say. Sometimes that's the most honest thing a loud man can do. Camille Vance was the one I hadn't expected. She came to bed 9 that afternoon, and her father was awake by then. Groggy, weak, but awake, alive, propped up and complaining about the food, which is the most beautiful sound a heart patient can make. She had heard by then, all of it, what her father's night had actually been, who had actually been fighting for him while she was demanding that nurse be fired. She found me in the hall, and she couldn't look at me at first. When she did, her face had none of the money in it anymore. Just a daughter who had almost lost her father and had spent the last day of his danger trying to take away the person keeping him alive. "I told them to get rid of you," she said. Her voice broke on it. "I called you cold. You saved his life. And I tried to have you fired for it." "Yes," I said, "because it was true. And because I have learned that people do not heal from a thing you refuse to let them say out loud. Why aren't you screaming at me? And here is the thing I most want. You to take from this, of everything I've told you. I looked at Camille Vance, and I did not feel the sweet, hot pull of revenge that I think a lot of people expected me to feel. That maybe you're even a little bit hoping I felt. I felt tired. And I felt, underneath the tired, something almost like tenderness, because I had sat beside a bed like the one her father was in, watching someone I loved, being every bit as frightened and every bit as awful as fear makes us. Because I know exactly what it is to love someone in one of those beds, I said, and to be so scared that you get cruel about it. I forgave you before you asked. Go sit with your father. He's going to want his daughter more than he wants his dinner. She went, and through the door, I saw her take his big old hand, and I saw him call her something. A childhood name, probably. And I turned and walked back to the nurse's station because a man in bed 4 had a rhythm I didn't quite like. And that, in the end, has always been the only title I ever wanted. I took the job, Director of Patient Safety. I said yes on one condition, and I said it in writing, the way I say everything that matters, so that no one could laugh it off later. The condition was this: that no nurse on any floor of Marin Hollow Regional would ever again be told by anyone that they were just a nurse. That the quiet ones, the night ones, the ones who see the hitch at 3 a.m. and hold the dose and chart it while the loud ones sleep. That they would be listened to first and doubted last. That competence would not have to prove it had a title before it was allowed to save a life. They wrote it into the policy. Section 4. I made sure. And I gave Kayla, the frightened 23-year-old who'd caught the truth in bed 4 and been told she was overthinking it, a place on the new Patient Safety Committee at 23, over the objections of people who thought she was too junior. She wasn't too junior. She was too right, too early, which is the same thing that had made me inconvenient for 30 years. I wanted the whole hospital built around people who see the truth early and say it out loud, instead of around people who need to be certain more than they need to be correct. Kayla runs a unit of her own now. She still calls me sometimes, late, when a rhythm on a strip doesn't sit. Right with her, and we talk it through, 2 nurses in the dark. And I think Gloria would be proud of both of us. The quiet good doesn't get headlines, but it does get passed on, hand to hand, in the small hours, from the ones who were seen to the ones who need seeing. That's the only inheritance in medicine that has ever mattered to me. Harold Vance went home 9 days later. He never fully understood what had happened in the dark. Heart patients rarely do. But before he left, he took my hand in both of his, and he said, "My daughter tells me you're the reason I'm walking out of here." "Your heart's the reason," I said. I just watched it. He smiled, that jaw remembering how to give an order. "She also tells me you're some kind of famous doctor, and you were hiding out here scrubbing bedpans." Which I don't believe for a second. "Believe half of it," I said, and let go of his hand. I never did tell Harold Vance the whole story, that I'd been a cardiologist, that I'd written the protocol that saved him, that his daughter had tried to have the author of his own survival thrown out of the building. It wouldn't have helped him to carry that. But Camille told him some of it, I think, because a few days after, he went home. A letter arrived at the hospital, addressed to me in a shaky, old-fashioned hand. Just one line inside. It said, "You looked at me when everyone else looked at the machines. Thank you for seeing an old fool worth saving. H." Vance. I keep it in my locker, next to a photograph of Daniel. Two men, years apart, who taught me the same thing from the wrong side of the bedrail. That the whole of medicine, underneath the machines and the titles and the loud, certain people, comes down to whether one person in the room at 3 a.m. actually sees you. I've spent my life trying to be that person. A letter like that tells me it took, once or twice. The last time a man's heart stopped in front of me, a doctor was screaming that I had killed him. He was wrong. And for 6 hours in the dark, I was the only one who knew. He was wrong. And I want to tell you, because I think you might need to hear it, whoever you are, wherever you're listening to this, that being the only one who knows is not the same as being alone. And being quiet is not the same as being weak. And the day the loud people in your life mistake your calm for something they can step on, you get to decide whether you spend your strength arguing with a wall, or whether you save it for 3 a.m., for the moment the machines start screaming and everyone suddenly, desperately, needs the person they spent all day underestimating. I saved mine. I always have. They called me just the night nurse. They should have asked who wrote the rules.